All right, hello everyone. Is there anyone out there who can hear me, who wants to come in? This is definitely the highlight of the day, at least for me, I think, because I'm gonna be on stage with all these super intelligent and cool guys and girls. Where are the girls? Hey! Yeah, this is going to be an honor, guys, because it's not often you have the chance to gather this kind of people with so much knowledge and different backgrounds, and also kind of still focused on the same thing, which is obviously blockchain technology. And I think they all have your kind of input and your way of contributing to this discussion. So for you, for those of you who have been maybe on stage or having coffee breaks, discussing your business ideas or something, and don't know who these guys are, I think we should start with just a quick walkthrough, just basically your name and what you work with right now. So no 5-minute intros, but just a quick intro so we know who these guys are.
So I'm Vinay Gupta. I helped launch Ethereum, and now I have a company called Materium, which does the legal and technical interface between the blockchain and real-world assets.
I'm Larry Sanger. I'm co-founder of Wikipedia, and I am now the Chief Information Officer of Everpedia. We are putting encyclopedias on the blockchain, monetizing knowledge. So.
I'm Roger Haenni. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Datum. We're a decentralized database, and we try to return data ownership to you as individuals and include you in the monetization of your data.
I'm Christoph Jentzsch, part of the early Ethereum team, did the DAO, Slockit, IoT, what you just heard.
My name is Joel Torstensson, and I'm working on the Uport project, which is basically self-sovereign identity system that lets users take back the control over their digital self.
I'm Mougayar. I'm a blockchain investor and author of the book, The Business Blockchain, and I spoke earlier this morning.
My name is John Ramvi, and I'm the CEO of Blockchangers, who's the organizers of this event, who also do community events and production and consulting.
Product development.
And product development.
I don't know if it's my mic that gives the...
Yeah, it's
sitting too close.
It's your mic.
So what to do? I'll stand behind you guys. For the time being. Maybe we can get someone to help me move the table here or something. We'll figure it out. Yeah, it feels a bit strange to be talking to your back, Vinay, but I'm going to set the tone here by starting to bring up John Stuart Mill, the philosopher, who said that democracy is kind of like the tyranny of the masses, or, and as you all know, when we're talking about blockchain technology, a lot of the promises of blockchain technology is to decentralize institutions that we build our societies on. So I'm wondering, does this mean that we have another way forward, like another kind of democracy, where this kind of censorship resistance means that even those part who are not the majority can build their systems within a society, that they can build institutions that kind of operate in a society without being ruled by the majority? Do you think that is actually what this technology can promise? Does anyone want to jump on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the right level of... That microphone's not going to work. You're going to have to turn it off.
Where do I turn it off? Can you just switch me off?
Okay. No, okay. Here, when we hand it that way, then it's away from there. Here, just hold this somewhere over there. There we no. Maybe? Maybe? Okay, that's good. Right. So, it's the right level of analysis, right? The whole questions of liberty, democracy, rights, constitutionalism, free will, all the rest of that stuff is the level of reality that the blockchain kind of affects. The fact that a bunch of anonymous people could start what amounts to a central bank of the internet without asking for sovereign authority, and that the stuff could become used, albeit on a limited basis, for international trade without anybody credentialing them to do it. This is a new route to legitimacy. And from a straight political theory level, it's not at all clear that we have any political theory that explains how a bunch of anonymous people can wind up with the political credibility to start and operate a central bank of the internet. Like, that's just weird. So I don't have any clean-cut answers for what is or isn't possible in this space, but the fact that you can have a central bank of the internet run by anonymous people that attain political legitimacy through a mechanism that we can't even really name, we're in uncharted territory, and in uncharted territory you have to go right back into the philosophy to be able to make predictions.
I think we should look at the blockchain to help not the places that already have democracy working, but rather in the places where they don't have democracy, or where they are afraid of speaking, and if they do speak, then they get hurt. And there are many countries in the world that are in that bucket. Although we have talked about this in theory, I have not seen it yet in practice. I'd love to see the blockchain help empower individuals that need to have a voice, but are afraid to be public with that voice. And if the blockchain can help to protect them and give them privacy while at the same time give them a voice, I think that's where the hope should go.
And I mean, to be fair, WikiLeaks is that speaker, right? I mean, Bitcoin initially got a lot of its early support because it was the only way to send WikiLeaks money. And WikiLeaks, love them or hate them, have turned out to be an enormously powerful force.
I agree with the statements completely that we want to see more democracy, but in practice what I'm seeing in the blockchain space in most projects is actually plutocracy in some form or another. That's what, even if it's mining power, if it's proof of stake, with all of those things, in the end it's a plutocracy. If you have more money, you have more power. And as long as we stick with anonymity, I think we will have plutocracy, and only if identity problems are solved, that people have one human, one vote, then we start looking into democracy.
But how do you start?
With people having an identity which they say they own by themselves. I think that's a starting point which you need in order for democracy to, on the blockchain at least, to pick up. I think it's one of the main user problems we have of people managing their keys and having identity linked to it. And this problem is the first one we need to solve if you want to have any kind of democracy on the blockchain.
Yeah, and I think the place to start is not maybe now we're going to create a democracy system for a nation, because that's very hard. So in my mind, experimenting in smaller communities for how we can build democracy-like systems and then scale them up seems like a better approach for these things.
Yeah, and as I'm from Switzerland, we have something called direct democracy, which means every 3 or 2 months you have to go and vote on something like 20 different proposals. Could be something very small, like building a new sports hall for the school in your neighborhood. And generally people trust this institution. So the problem in Switzerland is not that we need something like blockchain to enable this. But one thing I'd like to point out, a lot of things stagnate because of that in Switzerland. You'd actually think that people vote kind of radically for new proposals, but generally they don't. That's also, we had one election to legalize all drugs, didn't pass. And I think the legalize marijuana thing has been 3 or 4 times and didn't pass. So yeah, so I think blockchain is great for places where we need to have, you know, a way to do this decentralized voting and where a centralized system is not yet in place. But I wonder, once that system is in place, if you compare Switzerland to China, for example, so China is totally kind of almost a dictatorship, but it helps them a lot in progress, right? While in Switzerland, people are super conservative in this voting, and I just wonder if how is that going to turn out with real decentralized autonomous organizations, and are they going to give the output or the outcome that we expect or not in terms of what the majority will decide?
So I would say that the blockchain is definitely a democratizing influence for the very simple reason that it defines economic transactions that are performed between individuals without an intermediary. By definition, it's decentralized, and insofar as people are making decisions for themselves with no other definition than what's contained in the smart contracts, that means that, well, there's less scope for control and oversight by both governments and big corporations. Yeah, I think for that reason, it's generally a positive force.
So to me, I hope that blockchain can kind of be a race to the bottom of current business models. So usually a race to the bottom is something good for the customer, where one company outbids the other company and you get to buy something cheaper and cheaper. But at the end, one company goes bankrupt and then you're back to the monopoly and you're now even more screwed than you were before. So I hope that blockchain can kind of start this process, but instead of it just starting over again, that we have to define new business models that works in new ways, and I'm not sure what those are. Maybe they're based on some kind of DAO, something else. I'm not sure. Token economies can be 1,000 things, but I hope that we kind of can shift to a new way of doing business where purpose is more interesting than just profits. And maybe that could be blockchain. Of course, blockchain is also a lot about crazy big profits fast. And to me, that's kind of the opposite of what I guess we are hoping to do with the blockchain. But it's the same thing at 2 times.
But then, aren't we seeing a focus that is in the other way around, that you kind of monetize everything? You even, I was looking at this, the Brave browser and the basic attention token. It kind of freaks me out a little bit when you think of, someone is kind of measuring your attention and then it's going to be tokenized and you can sell every second of your eyes looking at an ad. And it just feels like, when you start monetizing on that level, it would just, it would freak me out as a human being to be measured and quantified in that way. Don't you agree?
The nice thing is always opt-in. None of the system, you're not forced to use them. For example, yes, it's a good example. I'm not using it right now. But all those systems are opt-in, where governments are more like, you're in here, you have to follow those laws.
I didn't know you were a communist. But, I mean, you can't fix stupid, right? I mean, there's just this fundamental drive to go out there and turn everything into property and then apply market forces to everything, right? And, the classical argument against this is, well, when you do it for love, you go from relationships to prostitution, and this is the suggestion that we're going to do this for everything in our societies. I don't think we're going to like the results, right? But how do you persuade people not to turn assets into property, right? You have something which is valuable. How do you persuade people not to turn it into a tradable commodity? How do you make a moral case or a constitutional case or even a heuristic case for this is something that should not be turned into property and this is something which could be turned into property? I'm not sure that we have, again, I think there's a political philosophy gap, that we're just in the early stages of this stuff, and we don't really have even the names for these kind of properties, these kind of attributes. So I feel like we're in a position where the technological acceleration is so fast that we can't even figure out the names for things before we have to make the decision about what we're going to do. You know, it's this constant crashing through the semantic forest, smashing into branches without the ability to do enough thought or planning ahead. And I don't know how we fix that. I mean, maybe we just hire like 100 science fiction authors and have them write stories so we could figure out the good sides and the bad sides of these scenarios before we're dumped in them. But, you know, I don't think the problem is so much the individual questions that we're hitting, like what happens when we monetize attention. It's the speed with which we're facing these questions, because we're in this kind of hyper acceleration forward in the blockchain space, because there's no break on the nerds. There are no managers to convince, there are no budget holders to convince, the CEOs are largely irrelevant because the technical teams are all self-funding. You know, we're just charging forward into the future in a completely unplanned way, and it constantly throws us off these cliffs of like, I don't even know what to call this, never mind what to do about it.
I guess I confess I don't really understand what the problem is. Basically, all the blockchain does essentially is disintermediate economic relationships. That's how I think of it. That doesn't create any new risks for monetizing everything any more than the system without any blockchains in it. It makes it possible for economic transactions to occur automatically and independently of like oversight mechanisms, at least most of them. But I would think, if anything, that actually limits the scope of control, and rather than expanding it over different aspects of life, because you can only make certain things machine processable.
So if you look to your left and look at the Datum project, Datum to your left. So you, I don't know. Do you feel that, you know, when I feel that this is gonna be so strange for me as an individual to kind of monetize my data and start selling it? What do you think about that?
First of all, so back to your example, right? Basic attention token, the Brave browser. This is happening already in the centralized world extremely heavily. So actually there are services like Hotjar. They give developers a full heat map of what you were looking at, where you were hovering over with the mouse. There's another service, Add This. No one usually knows this company. They give you a little social widget that you can add on your website, right? So that people can share your content on Facebook. They have almost 1 billion users per month through that little widget, right? It's a free service for developers. They only monetize through the data they collect. And hardly anyone knows about this. So I think for me that the better option is really to actually go ahead and push for full transparency. And then at least the first step for you to make a conscious choice is also to know what's going on. And at the moment we don't know what's going on. And also from the point of view, so you mentioned regulations, or, you know, can someone say like we should not turn this into a commoditized asset. So you need to know what's happening, right? And so for me, yes, I think that the future is going to be that people are at some point in the future going to expect from services that they're fully transparent with how they're handling data, what happens to this data, and also actually include the user, the individual, in the monetization of this data.
I think the challenge is not in whether we want to monetize data or how we monetize it, but it's about seeing the benefits and what's the outcome. So I don't mind giving my data. I mean, please take my data. But what are you giving me in return? And that's where I think we're failing, or we're not there yet. So we need to think about what are you giving back at the same time.
Yeah, and I think like the tokenization that is happening, I don't see it as only a monetization. I see it more as giving data on what's happening, as you said. And in order for us to make sense of the world, we actually have to get input from the world. And if we want to make good choices in a democracy way, we need to be able to see and sense the world.
So when we, or was there someone?
Just one little last comment. I found out that one of the hugest problems still is that people unfortunately do not care. They do not vote. They don't care about little things. If you think about $1 or $2 because I sold something somewhere per month, that's nothing even worth 5 or 10 minutes of their time spending on learning about it. So I think we still have this challenge of how to make a usable system where people think it's worth the time I spent on educating myself in order to take all those choices. Because if you democratize everything, meaning I have to vote and decide on everything and understand everything. And where is the part where we say now it's delegated voting, meaning I give my vote to someone who has more expertise than I have in this field?
Yeah, and so are we asking too much of the users in the blockchain space, you think, in general? Like you say, do we expect them to engage in all their services or understand how their data is used? And would it just be counterproductive, where you end up with people who just, it's too much, I don't care.
The hardest thing we ask of them is not to lose their private keys. I mean,
and still they do.
Just start
including
there.
me.
Just start there. Right? Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to derail you, but yeah, I mean, in terms of asking too much of the users, just not losing your private keys, already this is nightmarish.
Yeah, I agree.
So for the DAO, there was a problem with not enough people voting, right? So when if they came to the point to deliver money out, then there wasn't people kind of just buying it and holding it and hoping to make a revenue instead of actually taking part in the process that was the reason to buy this utility token to vote. So I kind of agree with you that we can't just dump new democracies on people, say keep voting on everything, every little thing, because that's too much democracy. We need to have the ability, but we can't expect it, I guess.
But do you think what people do want to build then, if they're really passionate about something, do you think this is kind of back to my original question, do you think they could build their own systems within a society? So I guess until now we've had kind of a geographic border, and within that border we have one system that is built with centralized organizations. Could it be that we are approaching, we're kind of crossing those borders and we can build parallel systems that, some users are following some rules and others are following other rules?
You mean like mafias?
Yes.
But you are talking about kind of bit nation and these kind of things where you have your own nation which doesn't follow the geographics of a country, right?
Well, it could be tax systems. It could be, I don't know. The more elaborate both DAOs and once you start building kind of blockchain-based institutions, the more elaborate they become. The more you can base your life on kind of a social security system.
I mean, let's take a simple example, right? We have a very nice piece of planetary infrastructure that does 60% of the heavy lifting for deciding what is real in the world, right? It's called Wikipedia, right? And it exists with a bunch of, I mean, you know this vastly better than I do, but a bunch of what amount to internal courts, and it's got kind of degrees of citizenship, and it kind of decides what's true for the whole world, more or less. You better pick over here. Take over. I mean, it's like a jurisdiction, isn't it? The country.
You're claiming that Wikipedia decides what is known?
Yeah.
I actually wrote an essay in 2007 on this very topic, like who decides what we know, and yeah, I mean, I clearly was mocked for taking your position. In other words, Wikipedia and other previous encyclopedias, they don't declare what is known, and I hope that no successor of Wikipedia can ultimately make that decision for us individually.
But I mean, it de facto does, right? I mean, for example, am not sufficiently notable, and that doesn't seem to be changing in a hurry.
Yeah. Well, just to address the question more directly, I mean, this reminds me of conversations I had as a grad student in philosophy with anarchists who want, this anarcho-capitalists especially like to talk about different government agencies that compete with each other, so you can pay one police department or another and they compete for each other's services or something like that. But it does violence to the very concept of government, which is, the definition is essentially an organization that has the monopoly on authority within a given jurisdiction. And basically there still has to be some sort of authority that negotiates between them and the different organizations, and then, whatever authority ultimately decides is going to be the real government. You can't. So I guess maybe I don't understand the question.
No, it's good. And do you think that blockchain, building government institutions and so on blockchain, is that for all political systems, or does it just make sense for an open democracy?
I just don't. I don't see how any totalitarian society can permit something that so radically empowers individuals. Blockchain is a radically individualist technology, basically, because it defines. It doesn't need oversight. And of course the SEC might disagree, but the point is, once something has passed muster with the SEC or other regulatory agencies, then it's just up to individuals and the contracts that they are agreeing to, and so that by its very nature means that other larger entities don't need to be involved. They don't need to be involved in financial transactions. You don't need, in a different sense, you don't need to have an editorial board or a group of editors approving a certain article before it's published. It's just a matter of the community deciding. It completely disintermediates the relationships that used to define, centralized oversight. So anyway.
So do you guys still? There was a lot of talk about the killer app, at least a year back or so. I haven't heard so much focus on the killer app anymore. Would you say
it was hacked?
We had the killer app and it didn't work out. Would you say that that was a naive thing, or are we still waiting for it, or are we waiting for more of a maturation of the whole space and of the mindset that we try to get people to think more decentralized ideas in general, or are we still waiting for that killer app to kind of make blockchain go mainstream?
What do you have against CryptoKitties? Surely.
But the killer app is really the interaction between all the applications. There's not going to be like one thing that breaks it halt. It's just going to be these things emerging together. And that's what I see as being the killer feature.
I mean, the old answer is that Bitcoin is the killer app, right? I mean, we haven't seen the mass adoption of anything else other than Bitcoin, really.
Yeah, and I think we are still in the stage of building infrastructure, more or less. And even we can speak about scalability, the whole panel. We are not ready for mainstream adoption yet. This is, of course, one problem. But the answer is still, I mean, we're all here, most of us at least, because we do love this technology and speak positive about it. But to be very honest, unfortunately, we did not enable much more than at least, for example, Bitcoin and even Ether and ERC20 tokens, mostly used for speculation. Of course, also other things. I will not exclude those things. But when we're seeing what benefits have we brought to society yet, there is still some lack. I feel we have not jumped over the big thing yet. It's still, we all feel it, we all know there is something, and we are looking for it and approaching very different things, and we know that smart contracts are very powerful in other systems, and we are starting to see something, but nothing really has taken off yet compared to anything like in usage at least, to use those things for speculations.
We're waiting for the sort of decentralized Facebook moment where suddenly
something like this.
Yeah.
ICOs can be seen a little bit like this. Of course, it's speculation, but it's at least crowdfunding projects. Of course, with the problems of non-regulated, you also all the scams, which brings a bad name to it. Although the idea is still not bad at the core of it, but we still are waiting for any of those things. And we have now, I think that the number of developers and people working on projects really are growing like 10x every year or so. So there is something, there will be something, but it's still a bit disappointing. I mean, we have met at DEF CON 1 2014 in Berlin. It's 4 years ago. I remember that was almost 3.5. So I remember a session where we spoke about like what will Ethereum bring to us. And it's a little bit disappointing that even after 3.5 years, money-wise, it was very successful. But on the applications we all dreamed of, and DAO was just one of them we thought of in the beginning and we tried to execute, still nothing has really taken off. And that's why I think all those conferences, we're speaking a lot about those things, but I'm still very keen on seeing where we are going.
I mean, it does seem like, you know, the original days of Ethereum, we rolled out about a 10-year roadmap that we expected to be done in about 18 months.
Yes,
you know,
I know.
Like, you know, the vision of the future, you know, was originally that things like MetaMask or, you know, Mist rather, were expected to be built before the initial release. You know, scaling was going to be, you know, most of the way through like 6 months. If you'd asked this at the time, you know, the expectation was that we were going to be moving to proof of stake like 6 months after the Ethereum token release. So, you know, the fact that it's turned out to be a heck of a lot harder in practice than in theory, I don't think changes the trajectory. It just means we're moving towards those goals more slowly. And I'm very optimistic about Plasma.
I mean, yes, it is true. I completely agree with this. But also I feel there was a little change in sentiment in the community at least. So back at the time when we did the DAO, for example, if we would have said, 5% of the tokens go to Slocket, they would have crucified us. Meaning there was like this needs to be decentralized and autonomous and everything. Like the first token sales, for example, Augur, from the idea it is you build it and then you move away. And it can continue forever. Yeah. Like the same, like Bitcoin is the same for Ethereum, for Augur. Then the DAO was sort of like this. Afterwards, people thought of, well, for security reasons, we have to make it more centralized, and they have not moved away from this anymore. Now we're seeing not much movement in terms of building something which is truly decentralized and autonomous, where we can walk away after 5 years and it will not affect the system anymore. Yeah. And that's something I am missing, which I felt a little bit was lost after all the DAO hack and story and all of this happened. And I hope that this will come back and we see more thinking in this direction.
Word. So, do we have a few questions from the audience? Anyone there? Okay.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It's really interesting, actually, especially the last point. My name is Gary Bernstein, and I'm the CEO and founder of CodeTrader, and we're a decentralized fund management platform. And as such, it's self-auditing because you can see the proof of performance on the blockchain and so on. So one of the problems that we've had with could have also with DAO and securities and all these legal problems is that the SEC was there from 1933 not only to go after securities per se, but also the idea of fraud. And as we have fund management potentially disrupting hedge funds and regulatory bodies because proof of performance can be shown on the blockchain by using decentralized exchanges for the trades themselves, thereby supporting ICOs and pre-ICOs as well, with complete liquidity, we can show, well, all the information is there. The proof, how much he performed, what the fees are, and all the terms. So, how can we work on, simplifying for people the ability to be fund managers or to be involved in funds in the spirit of perhaps not the letter of the law now, but the spirit of the law, which was, to protect consumers, not to, necessarily be anti-securities, things like that. Maybe you have some comments on this.
Anyone feel the urge?
But my question is, why would you need a blockchain to provide this level of transparency? Could you not do it with a database?
Well, no, in short. So basically, we're like a super DEX infrastructure. In short, not really. Database is, a centralized thing, right? The blockchain is the sort of decentralized, distributed ledger. So basically, we're a super DEX infrastructure, a super decentralized exchange infrastructure, tying together Bancor, Kyber, 0x, AirSwap to provide maximum liquidity and power. And also, that way, when you make a trade on decentralized exchange, the record is on the blockchain, okay, and everyone can see the proof of performance. And you can also see what the fees will be, and it's also that you see when you can pull out and when you can't.
Yes.
But so what I'm hearing is it's transparent, but if you would, in your company, would close down tomorrow, would it still continue to work as programmed? I don't know a project in detail. That would be the question for me.
Well, the answer is that the profits go to, in our case in CoTrader, it's cotrader.com if you want, Telegram CoTrader, but the profits go to some burns. If there's nothing to do with the profits, no projects are voted on to progress the platform, so just burn them. And then if the DAO does vote, so the profits go to a DAO, in short, and the DAO can basically, whoever owns more tokens can have, more of a say.
Yeah, I think you mentioned SEC, right? And I guess you're a bit unhappy that you maybe can't do all that you want to do, right? But so from my point of view, I'm very strongly kind of for regulation. I want to know what is kind of a utility, what is a security, right? But we've seen not many, but some ICOs that basically raised a lot of money and ran away, right? And an ICO is kind of similar to an IPO in a stock market. It's just much harder to pull off this kind of scam on a stock market because we have all this regulation in place. So I don't really foresee a future, right, where regulators will be very liberal and say, well, you can basically have these kind of securities on the blockchain, and there it's okay to do whatever you want, right? But like on our stock market, we are keeping the regulation.
That's actually a great point, but my point was not to get away from securities laws, but you actually provide a tools framework to follow them. They just not necessarily the laws are that were made then. The spirit of them is good, principle-based, but for token registration, it may not be as good. And also, as I said, say a fund manager takes you into an ICO of some sort that's allowed. His proof is sort of on the blockchain. So if he performs badly, he'd be very disincentivized to do that because he could lose his entire history that he's worked so hard to gain. So there are other checks in place.
I think we have to keep it shorter. Did you want to finish up with, is that a question mark at the end? And do anyone want to comment on?
I want to comment.
Yep.
I agree a lot with what you're saying about regulation, and I think that's important to kind of get people to regulate what we're doing here so that we can follow the rules and we know what rules apply. What I see as kind of a challenge is that I want this space to flourish, and I want things like CryptoKitties not to be scrutinized by the SEC, because I think that's it's going to be hard to create kitty games if it's a big financial institution. But I do think that things like Ether and Bitcoin maybe should be regulated, or bigger ICOs, because it is speculation, right, into trying to make a buck. And then you should be secured by the regulation that is put in place.
Yeah, and I think people don't give existing regulations enough credit. So in Switzerland, you can do a security token, you just have to follow the security law. In Hong Kong, you can run a sort of an online bank as long as you only have something like 1,000 customers or 1 million in volume, right? If you want to exceed that, then you have to put up with the regulations that are put specifically in place, right? So that no one creates a bank and takes $1 billion in deposits and runs away. And I do think there is, actually in many countries, there's many fintech sandboxes that allow you to do many, many things. So I think if you want to do a security token now, you can, right? If you're hoping for super relaxed regulation in the future, that kind of brings down, if you do an IPO, right, you need something like $50 million in revenue or so, depending on the stock market. Yeah, I don't think that is realistic that it will really go that far.
Should we take the final question from the audience and then we have to finish off? So please keep it short and with a question mark in the end.
So one of the killer apps for money was the ability to specialize. I could do one job and get cash for it, and then I could buy something that somebody else was really good at, like, growing crops or something like that. Have any of you had any thoughts about things like universal income and how we can redo how we earn money? One of our main uses of money is earning it.
But we're already doing that in small ways by earning tokens by putting our attention, like the examples I gave this morning, like on Steemit and others, and we're going to see more models like that. So I think that's one valid use case of the blockchain, where we are either going to be giving data or sharing data and then earning something back, or sharing attention, sharing time, sharing knowledge. I like to see us starting in small steps. And again, I said I don't like the boil the ocean types of statements when we say we're going to have universal income for everybody, or we're going to solve the big problems of the world. I mean, these challenges are very difficult to solve head on. I think we should take small steps and then get to those bigger problems gradually.
I think it would be interesting to not get paid for your work once a month and not once a week, but maybe every second or millisecond. So it would kind of be a flow of money instead of just an income once a month. And if you did the same for payments, then you would kind of just know whether you had a green flow where it went in positive or it was a negative flow. So buying a pack of gum wouldn't influence your flow at all. So you don't have the same feeling for money, because it's just how much flow of money is going through you. And in that way, credit wouldn't seem like such a bad thing, because it's just increasing your flow for a small payment every millisecond. And that's kind of new, interesting ways, I think, to think about money. But I'm not sure blockchain could do that with that transaction speed or cost throughput.
We will see in the near future. I think that would have to be the final remark, and I want to thank you all, and audience, please give them a warm applause.